What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp Podcast. I am here with Tim.
Your hostess with the mostest.
And this is part 2 to our off-season madness kind of episodes that we're doing. And this will be us kind of catching up on all of the actual true free agency signings from last week, Wednesday, July 28th up until now, August 4th. So we're just going to be going through and discussing all the stuff that we didn't discuss last episode. And there's still, some significant free agents left on the market, obviously. So as those guys still sign, we will, we'll put out episodes here and there. But a lot of that's also hinging on certain teams. Like I know the Islanders, for one, are still working out a lot of stuff with their cap space, so we're not really sure what they're doing. So if anything happens significant after this, we'll be sure to put out an episode. Otherwise, the next time you'll see us will probably be maybe talking about some stuff in the offseason, those random one-off episodes we like to do. But all that being said, let's get down to business. So we'll start by talking about some re-signings here. We'll start with the big one. You and I actually had a discussion yesterday about this. Zach Werenski, 24 years old, signs a 6-year, $9.5 million contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I know you have some opinions regarding this, so what do you think about this?
So I'd like to start off with, I think Zach Werenski is a great defenseman. I personally think he's I think he's a top 10 easy and overall defenseman, not excluding offense, not categorizing offensive or defensive defenseman. I think he's just an all-around top 10 defenseman. But to get his agent did a real good job is really what I have to say about this. To get him over 9.5 is crazy, considering the week before or days before we saw Dougie and McCarr get contracts lower than that at around $9 million apiece. So I thought that was just crazy, and I don't know if you looked this up or not. I'm gonna look it up right now.
Well, so I know what you're gonna say. He's the third highest paid defenseman because Erik Karlsson's cap hit is $11.5 million.
What was his average though?
Well, that's AAV is $11.5 million.
Well, I didn't know if you meant when you said cap hit. I wasn't sure if you meant this year.
No, well, cap hit is the consistent number. The salary is the one that goes up and down. Cap hit is AAV. It's the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing, but annual average salary and cap hit generally stay pretty consistent. It's the bonuses and stuff that make up the salary. But his cap hit is 11.5, and Drew Doughty's cap hit is 11 million. The guy below, at this point, him would be Roman Josi, whose cap hit is $9,059,000, and then obviously McCarr and Hamilton at 9 apiece. So, he's the third highest paid defenseman at this point in the NHL. And we were discussing it, and I think part of what you have to look at is the Seth Jones contract. I think had a lot to do with what he got, because Seth Jones next year will be making $9.5 million. This year he's making 5.4. He's still on that deal he signed in 2016, but Seth Jones next year is making 9.5, and really for the most part, Seth Jones and Zach Werenski were kind of one and the same for a long time. You didn't really talk about one without discussing the other. I mean, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they played together so often. They were the two superstars on that team. But I think that Seth Jones signed that contract kind of set the bar. And then, when you look at it, part of it you also have to realize is what is a player worth to that team. And now that Werenski is the Columbus Blue Jackets, essentially, after most of their more notable players have been traded away at this point, the only real names that are left on that team are Zach Werenski, Patrick Laine, and Eunice Corpusalo. and maybe Elvis Merzlikins people know, but I mean he's kind of the team for what it's worth at this point. And every season up besides last season, he had pretty good numbers: 47 points, 37 points, 44 points, 41 points. He scored 20 goals. He's never scored less than 11. So I think in the long run, it's worth it. If he can keep up this pace, if he puts up 40-ish points a season, he gets you between 10 and 15 goals, occasionally pops off for 20, being as good as he is in his own end, I think the contract is worth it. And to the Columbus Blue Jackets, it's definitely worth it because
I think to them it's worth it. And I think that's I agree with that point really thoroughly, but I don't think he'd be making that on a different team would just be my point.
I don't think he'd be making that much less though. I think he'd maybe be making 9, but I don't think he'd be making much less than 9.5, honestly. I think he's just that good, But the market for defensemen this offseason was kind of an interesting one. So, the fact that Dougie Hamilton was on the market and then he also signed that contract the day before the Werenski contract, you kind of set the bar pretty high. So, all things considered, I think it's a worthwhile investment. And I honestly think this contract will age pretty well. I mean, it's only a 6-year contract, So it's only going to take him till he's 30. So you're not risking taking him into his mid to late 30s on a high contract where he might be injured, he might not play as much. It's a relatively good contract, I think, for both parties. I think it's good for the Jackets and it's good for Werenski because, if he decides he doesn't want to play them anymore, it's not like he has this albatross of like a 10-year contract carrying around. So I think it's solid. It's a solid deal. And, I guess we'll stay in Columbus as well. Patrick Laine accepted the qualifying offer, so he's got a 1-year, $7.5 million contract next season. Do we...
I don't think...
Go ahead.
I think that's a really interesting price to pay for him, especially but the tour, it really comes down to, it's a 1-year deal, so I don't really mind it because we still don't know what he's going to do. We haven't really seen him play a full season where he wasn't getting bitched out in 2 years. So who knows? He might come out and shock the league and be a 30-goal scorer. He might come out and do what he did last season, though. Who knows?
I mean, I think he's got the talent to do it. I mean, obviously, he has the talent. He scored 36 his rookie year, then 44, then 30. He scored 28 in a 68-game season in 2019-20, so he probably would have ended up hitting the 30 mark. It was really only last season where it was really, really rough for him. I mean, only 12 goals through 46 games. A lot of that comes down to the fact that he was playing under John Tortorella, who just...
And a cancerous team. Like, the team as a whole was just...
Yeah, and he just was getting ridden the entire time. I mean, it was, his second game in Columbus that he was benched, so I think you can kind of excuse a lack of production last year on that. And honestly, for a guy who has the potential to hit 30 goals every single season, the market now is kind of saying, hey, maybe, $7 million, that's kind of fair value. I don't really know, though, if he's really going to be a Columbus Blue Jacket for that long, Well,
the problem is if he does well this year and he gets those 30 goals, the chances of him wanting to re-sign there, if the team doesn't do well, are probably slim.
And it's rough because, he's an RFA, right? Like, he's still got a couple more years left of being a restricted free agent. He doesn't have that kind of leeway of being a UFA, but he does have the leeway of just simply demanding a trade. And with the direction that the Blue Jackets are seemingly going, it seems like they're starting to go into a rebuilding direction. The losing of Seth Jones, or the trading of Seth Jones, the trading of Cam Atkinson for Jacob Voracek, you take on a bigger contract, you're losing cap space in that way. It kind of seems to me like they might be trying to either retool on the fly, or they're saying that this is it. This is the direction of the club. And I kind of think that they need to head in that kind of direction of, hey, let's not get too deep into this. Let's not kill 2 or 3 years and then all of a sudden turn around and say, well, now we have to rebuild all of a sudden, In the NHL, you want to either be getting better fast or you want to be getting worse fast. You don't want to end up in this like mediocre, ho-hum kind of garbage position. So I don't know. It's definitely rough for the Jackets. They're one of the teams that I think have fallen off the hardest over the last couple of years. And it's just kind of unfortunate to see, because they had what looked to be, potentially a pretty good roster that they were putting together.
They had a team that knocked out the Tampa Bay Lightning round 1, 5 games.
And then they also knocked out the Leafs last year. So, or I should say 2 years ago, technically, because we're now in the 2021 season. So, technically 2 years ago. But, So, just some big re-signings going on there. Let's jump around a bit now. No real direction. I mean, the Braden Point contract, 8 years, $9.5 million. Kind of have to give it to him. I mean, it's Braden Point. It's your best, arguably your number one center. So, not really surprised there. This is part of the reason why we knew the Tampa Bay Lightning were going to have to move out salary, because they had to pay these guys.
You're not going to let him walk. There's no world where you let him walk.
Yeah, like he's under contract this season. He's still only making $6.75 this season. This is an extension, but you want to get that extension done early. You don't want to risk him walking away and leaving you with nothing, essentially. So, right now the Lightning are roughly 6 some odd number of change over the salary cap. Obviously, once the season starts, the Brent Seabrook contract will be put onto LTIR, and they'll likely be under the cap, but not by much. So, they've still got a little bit of wiggle room. I think they can still field this roster for this season, but next season, somebody's going to have to go again, and we're still going to see a lot of roster shuffling with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And, yeah, I mean, you had to give that contract to him. So, but let's talk about Dougie Hamilton, because you mentioned him. Kind of a weird signing, in my opinion.
Super strange, honestly. Not that there's anything wrong with this part either, but having 2 $9 million defensemen on your team, kind of crazy. It's a lot of money in your top 2.
Yeah, I mean, Subban's contract is up at the end of next season, so they'll probably renegotiate him down. They better hope for their sake that he doesn't turn into the PK Subban we all know that he can be, because if he returns to that form, he'll probably at least ask for another $8 million deal. But
I was gonna say, there's the chance. I would say him on a good team is still scary, because he's not a bad player. It's just the way that he plays can't work on a team that isn't good. Honestly, he takes too many risks. He takes too many big opportunities.
He takes too many risks, but also, I think we saw last year. In my opinion, we saw him trying to do too much. We know Subban's one of the more talented defensemen in the NHL. He's definitely one of the more explosive in terms of his ability to move the puck and make those kind of plays. But he was trying to do too much with, let's be honest here, he wasn't really working with a whole lot up front for most of last season. So I still think Subban is a serviceable defenseman. Is he a $9 million defenseman? Maybe not right now, but if he captures some of that magic, I think he's worth it. But, this offseason, the Devils really made a point in beefing up their back end. They traded for Ryan Graves. They had Dougie Hamilton. They have PK Subban. They still have Ty Smith, who I think is criminally underrated, honestly. He's one of the best young defensemen in the NHL that nobody talks about. They traded for Jonathan Bernier, or they signed Jonathan Bernier. I think that the Devils made a point in saying, hey, we have a lot of young guys. I mean, their average age of their forwards right now is 23.1. That's insane to have your average age of your forward core be 23. I think that they said, hey, you know what? It's time to start making moves. Let's start making a push. Let's make a push for the playoffs. And they're making moves and signing Hamilton. That definitely beefs up your chances for the playoffs. Do you think Dougie Hamilton is a fit in New Jersey? Because I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot is, you just signed a big name. He's so good. He can fit anywhere. Do you see any issues potentially cropping up with Dougie Hamilton in New Jersey?
One of the problems that I'm seeing is him and Subban together. And because, let's be honest, they're probably not going to play together. They'll probably be, one of them will be on the first line, one of them will be on the second line. And so, who are you going to give the first line?
I mean, you could put Ryan Graves up there. I think he's good enough. I still think you want to shelter Ty Smith a little bit, so I think you put him on the second line with Subban, but I mean,
I would say if you want to shelter him, I would say put him on the second line with Dougie.
Oh, I think Dougie's going to be on the first, honestly. I think you bump Subban down to the second line. I mean, Dougie Hamilton, you're playing him as much as you possibly can. You're getting him those 20 minutes a night, I think.
Do you think Subban's the type of player, though, to really take anything under first line, though, time?
I think so. I think, for as much as we talk about Subban's personality, he's never really seemed to me to be the kind of guy to worry about something like that.
He's a guy, without a doubt. But he's also a competitor.
I think
and a heavy one at that.
I think you put him on the second line, you give him maybe 18 minutes or so of 5-on-5 time, and you still keep him on your power play and penalty kill, like your first line on both of those. I don't think that he has an issue with that, honestly. If he was maybe more of an Ovechkin type guy who for a fact when he gets benched, he just doesn't care anymore, and
or Patrick Laine before everything happened.
Yeah, where ice time was the only thing he cares about. And I also think Subban has to, probably these last couple seasons has realized okay, I'm not the kind of player I want to be, so I can't be mad at the team for saying, well, we have Dougie here, we're going to give him that first line. I mean, the other thing about this signing it makes the Devils' defense really scary. Listen to these heights and weights that they have now.
Oh, yeah.
Ryan Graves is 6'5", 220. Hamilton is 6'6", 229. Jaros, who they got from the Ottawa Senators, is 6'3", 222. Severson, 6'2", 205. Siegenthaler, 6'3", 211. Ty Smith, 5'11", 175. And Subban, 6', 210. They have one defenseman who's less than 6 feet tall and less than 200 pounds, and that's Ty Smith. That's some big boys on the back end of New Jersey, that's for sure. Do you think that there's anything that we might see with Dougie Hamilton maybe kind of missing the fact that he was playing with Jacob Slavin, who's one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL? Do you think we might see him maybe get exposed a little bit more because he doesn't have that security blanket on his left side anymore?
I mean, not even just that. He's been on the same team for so long. This is a completely new system that he's in. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a bump in the beginning.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some growing pains, and I think that we're going to really see, one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to see, Hamilton is every bit as good as we thought he was, and it's not just, nobody ever said, Hamilton is only good because he plays with Slavin, but, you might say, he's just as good in his own end as he is in the offensive zone. We just didn't notice because Slavin was so good. Or we're going to say, there's some cracks in Hamilton's game that the Devils are going to need to account for. And, I definitely anticipate some bumps in the road early on, specifically defensively. And, there's definitely going to be some adjustments having to be made by this Devils team, bringing in, 3 new defensemen over this offseason, half a defensive core, essentially.
Like you said, they have a young forward core, so I'm expecting speed and, just pressure from both ends, from the forward core specifically. I would assume you want them buzzing.
I mean,
just running through lines, just buzzing through them.
And we also are not talking about the fact that in 2 to 3 years, there's going to be Luke Hughes also playing on that back end. So it's scary. It's scary. I mean, New Jersey's really putting together a solid back end. I think that this year they have, a good defensive core. I think in 2-3 years they're going to genuinely have one of the best in the NHL, honestly. And man, that Metro Division it gets better and better every single year. I realistically think that there's no easy wins this year, maybe outside of the Columbus Blue Jackets. There's no team I can count out right now and say, yeah, they're not a playoff team besides Columbus. I could see this Devils team making a wild card spot. I genuinely could. I don't think they will, but I could see it. I could easily see it. So we'll hop around here a little bit. One of the more odd kind of instances that happened, Philip Grubauer signs a 6-year, $5.9 million deal with Seattle, and Seattle just trades Vitek Vanacek back to Washington. I don't really get it. I don't really understand what the play was here with Seattle. Maybe they just did it for the memes, but I mean, I guess one of my questions, do you think Philip Grubauer is worth $5.9 million?
That's an interesting one because
I mean, he was a Vezina candidate, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I guess no, 5.9 probably isn't bad. We've been talking about how you need to give good goalies big money and keep them to really make a team. So maybe that's what they think. It's just a little early in his stardom for that much money, I think. But I don't know. Maybe they see something I don't. But he also played for the Colorado Avalanche, though, who had not the greatest defense, but their offense was so dominant. It takes it's obviously it's hard to play when you don't have the puck, and it's hard to score when you don't have the puck.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's fair. The Kraken confused me because, as I said briefly when we were talking about last time, I don't know why they didn't go for just Brendan Dillon and then just not bother with Vanacek and then get a great defenseman and not just get another pick, because that's really all they did was they got a pick out of this. But then again, they probably didn't know that they were going to get Philip Grubauer when they did that. So
yeah, I mean, I honestly thought he was just going to stay in Colorado. So, let's stay on the goalie train. There's 3 other goalies I want to talk about. 2 of them we'll kind of talk about in tandem. But we'll talk about one of them. Linus Ullmark signs a 4-year, $5 million deal to the Boston Bruins. Tuukka Rask's future still up in the air at this point. We're not really sure if he's playing next season. There were rumors that he was still hurt. Somebody said that they saw him walking in crutches. So with where the Bruins are at, and obviously still trying to remain a competitive team, do you think that Linus Ullmark is, let's assume Tuukka Rask doesn't play next season for whatever reason, do you think Linus Ullmark was the right decision for the Boston Bruins?
Well, they still have Swayze. Is that his name? S- Sweeney. What is it? Um, I'm sorry.
Jeremy
I'm drawing
Swayman.
Swayman. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
drawing a blank. They still have Swayman, and I don't. Boston's interesting, to be honest. Like, I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they've had some really interesting signings just out of the Allmark one.
Well,
So I don't know if that back end is gonna be serviceable in front of him. Would be my bigger concern.
let's also discuss, simultaneously while we're talking about the Boston Bruins, the fact that David Krejci's not playing next season.
Exactly, and that's a huge loss.
Who do you put? They signed Nick Foligno in the offseason, which is, I think he's a prototypical Boston Bruin, which,
He's a serviceable.
like, what are the Toronto Maple Leafs doing? I don't understand. They're just throwing resources at players that they don't want anymore. But, they signed Nick Foligno. But who's your second line center at this point? I mean, Eric Howla could be an option. Charlie Coyle, I think, given the right set of circumstances, I think Charlie Coyle is good enough to play on that second line, certainly. Just kind of sucks for Taylor Hall, right? Like, he developed all this chemistry. Him and Krejci last season were clicking on all cylinders, making beautiful plays to each other, and then Krejci's like, man, I'm going home. I'm going to the Czech
Taylor
Republic.
Hall's career is honestly just summed up by an unfortunate series of events.
Can I also just go on record really, really quickly about Taylor Hall and just say that I like this contract for him. Like, he's getting paid like the player that he is finally. Like, we're not offering him $9 million. I think $6 million is great for Taylor Hall. So for
That's
all of
what
you
he did
guys
last
that
year in
like,
Boston, yeah.
for all of you guys saying out there that, like, if anybody wants to come at my neck and just say, oh, you just hate Taylor Hall, you can't stand a man. I think this is a fantastic contract for him. He's getting paid what he is, and I think this is a great deal for him. $6 million for a guy that can put in 25 to 30. Great. That's a solid contract. But, and the big but in the room is, who's his center? I think a second line of Hall, Coyle, and Foligno is one of the better second lines in the NHL. But, do you think, having seen Charlie Coyle play on the Boston Bruins all this time, do you think that he's ready to step into that second line role?
Yeah, why not? He's got the experience. He doesn't have like yeah, he's got some experience. I think you need to take a risk sometimes, especially with the team with like when you lose. Like we've seen random players do amazing things before and really step up. And hockey's a sport where stepping up means everything. And one season can make or break you. So I wouldn't mind seeing him on the second line.
I think,
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
also there's not really much play like there is, but there really isn't much difference between your second and your third line in some systems.
I think in the Bruins system, the only issue with having kind of a weak second line center, and I'm not saying Coyle's a weak second line center. I think Coyle is good enough to get it done. Honestly, I do. And he might not kill it on points every year. He might hover around. He did have 56 points in one season with the Minnesota Wild, but he generally hovers between 20 to 40 ish. Which is it's a little low for a second line center. 40 points is not really what you're looking for. You're really hoping they push that 50 to 60 mark. But I think his defensive work is good enough to replace that second line defensive spot. The problem with the Bruins is we saw them be exposed for being a one-line team when Pasternak was out. So if your second line center's not getting it done and not cutting it, you have to really rely on that top line even harder. It's another way to kind of expose the Boston Bruins as a team. So I think that's their only concern maybe at this point, is saying, well, we can't just afford to have the perfection line be the only line going every night, because that's kind of what did us in the playoffs. I mean, against the Islanders, nobody else was really doing anything besides that top line, and Taylor Hall was chipping in with Krejci every now and then. But I just think that it's good to start the season with. I would certainly not have any opposition to them giving him a shot at the top of the season, but if he doesn't start to push that offensive game a little bit more and really thrive with guys like Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno, I think we would see the Bruins start to search for a second-line center around the NHL. So, that being said, I guess all things considered, to get back to the original point with Linus Ullmark, I think it's good for Linus. I'm really happy for him. I just want to see how he performs on a good team, because we've seen it before where goalies look great because they're playing for a bad team, but they're still making all these saves, and you're like, wow, like, he's making all these incredible saves. His stats are decent for a bad team. This is crazy. Get this guy on a good team, and then all of a sudden he goes on a good team, and you're like, oh, there's like a lot of cracks in the armor here that we just weren't noticing because we just kind of were like, oh, well, he's just on the Sabres, or oh, he was just on the Jackets, or whatever. So, do you think that we might end up with a situation like that with Linus Ullmark, or are you fairly confident that he is a good goalie and he just was suffering on that bad team?
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if the eye test necessarily favored him too much, in my opinion. And as an eye test man, for you, I know that makes a big difference to you. So I don't know if you felt differently about that, but I don't know. It's a tough one, because the eye test is both skewed in that, look, the player's in a certain team on a certain system. He has things that he's expecting to be done, or he knows are out of his control or whatnot. Different emotions and feelings that relate to how you perform. So I'm not sure I'm necessarily confident that he's going to be a great goaltender. I think he has the potential. Maybe a new system, a new coach, new everything, he really kicks it up a notch. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen a goalie go somewhere and really turn up. Not that Cam Talbot ever played bad in any of the teams he was on before Minnesota, but we saw him absolutely tear it up in Minnesota for some reason.
Yeah, I think really my only concern is with the Bruins as a whole. It kind of feels like they just got slightly worse at most positions.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's why I'm not really sure how to feel. I don't know how to feel about him, because I don't know how to feel about the decor in front of him, which is the bigger problem.
It's like that, they turned Tuukka Rask, who's one of the best goalies in the NHL. Let's not beat around the bush. Despite what some Bruins fans might think, he's one of the best goalies they've ever had in their history. You turn Tuukka Rask into Linus Ullmark, which absolutely zero disrespect to Linus Ullmark, but when you compare him to one of the best, it's a downgrade. Even if it's only slightly, it's a downgrade. You turn David Krejci into Charlie Coyle. Again, no disrespect to Charlie Coyle. I like him a lot, but offensively, at least, it's a downgrade. And
he's also not winning over 53% of his draws or whatever Krejci wins.
So it's like the Bruins just kind of got slightly worse at every position. So it's like, wow, how is this really going to impact the way that the team as a whole plays, which is going to directly impact the goaltending? I don't know. I think that Linus Ullmark, if I had to rate him on my scale that we always use, I think he's a starter. I think he has the potential to push that above average starter mark. I do. But is he Tuukka Rask? No. So how are we going to see that play out?
He's a serviceable solution, but he might not be the problem.
Well, the Bruins are also going for a Stanley Cup still. So Is he the kind of goalie that can win you a Stanley Cup when you haven't gotten back there with Tuukka Rask all these years? That's the real question, right? Like, can Linus Ullmark do what Tuukka Rask didn't? I don't think so. I don't. I think if you put the two of them on the same team, you're still going to take Rask every day over Ullmark. And who knows? Rask might actually play this season, but as of right now, it's not looking very good. So, But I am happy for Ullmark. I'm glad he got the contract because he has been playing his ass off in Buffalo, and he deserves it. You know, after all the things that he went through last season, with that, losing the family member mid-season, just dealing with Buffalo's nonsense, the injuries. I'm glad that he finally, he's getting paid. So, best of luck to him. I'm not thrilled with the Bruins offseason as of yet. So, but, and the other two goalies I wanted to talk about before we can move on to some other key players. The Hurricanes and the Leafs basically swapped goaltenders more or less. Peter Mrazek goes to the Toronto Maple Leafs on a 3-year, $3.8 million deal, and Freddie Anderson goes to the Carolina Hurricanes on a 2-year, $4.5 million deal. We'll start in Toronto, and we'll go down south after. How do we feel about essentially turning Freddie Anderson into Peter Mrazek at this point?
Okay, so listen to this. This is my. I've been working on this impersonation, right? Oh yeah, so we really don't like goalies. How do we get a worse goalie to try and win a cup with? I know, we'll trade our good one.
Yeah, I mean,
what?
Well, yeah.
Goal scoring isn't the problem. We discovered this. Defense is kind of the problem. We've discovered this. Your goaltending was kind of a problem at some points. We discovered this. So how did you fix one of the solutions? You just made it worse. They really tried to double negative into a positive.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Toronto Maple Leafs combined next year are paying their goalies $5.45 million. So it's clear that that's where they decided they needed to save money because they had to save money somewhere. I don't think we can really fairly judge Freddie Anderson on what happened to him last year. I genuinely think that what happened to him, I mean, he was playing hurt. All right, let's not be stupid and let's not be silly. When you're playing hurt, your stats are going to suffer. You're not going to be playing the same way. He was playing hurt. Half the time he was playing without a backup because Jack Campbell was hurt. So he was starting all those games. And the team in front of him sucked. I mean, sure, he was letting in some really rough ones, but the team in front of him defensively sucked. Outside of that last year, Freddie Anderson has been one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, full stop, period, no argument. For the team that he was on, the stats he was putting up were insanity.
Yeah.
I think that to judge him solely on last season is unfair. And here's my other problem with this signing in Toronto of Peter Mrazek, okay? I think Peter Mrazek is a starting goalie. I think he's a starting caliber goaltender. I don't think he ever gets any better than that. I don't think he can really push that elite company, okay?
Especially since he can't even play more than 20 games without breaking something.
Well, so that's actually what I was going to get at. Toronto better have a really good third-string goaltender because Mrazek has been hurt the last couple seasons, and so is Jack Campbell. I mean, Jack Campbell was hurt a lot last year. Peter Mrazek was hurt last year. So neither one of these guys are the kind of guys that you can run for, a 10-game stretch. Like, let's say, for example, Jack Campbell gets banged up, right? And he's out. And you're playing 10 games in 20 nights. Game every other day. Mrazek is not really the kind of goalie that you want to be starting in 10 straight games like that because he gets hurt. And then the same is the opposite. If Mrazek goes down, you don't really want to be starting Jack Campbell that many games because he's also prone to be getting hurt. I think if they're both healthy, they're the perfect tandem. You start each one of them like 40 or so games, it works out. But if one of them goes down, you better have a third stringer who's ready to step in, because it's not like you have a Henrik Lundqvist in net who was like almost never injured ever. You know, you have two guys that consistently miss time. So what's your solution then if one of them gets hurt? Because your best third string goalie right now is Michael Hutchinson, and we all know how much the Toronto Maple Leafs love to play in front of Michael Hutchinson. I don't get it. I really don't understand. Like, you took what wasn't really necessarily a big issue, your goaltending, because like I said, outside of last year, the goaltending for the Maple Leafs has been pretty good. Well, the starter anyway. They never really had a backup, but the starting goaltender, Freddie Anderson, was pretty good. You took what wasn't an issue, and now you've kind of made it a problem. And did they funnel any of that money into anybody with any grit or anybody with anything that's going to solve the fact that they're soft? No. I mean, okay, you signed Nick Ritchie. I'm happy for you. But can I maybe get somebody, like, can I get an entire fourth line together of some grinders? Like, maybe we get a Nick Ritchie, Wayne Simmons paired with a center kind of fourth line, because I'm not really seeing anyone else. So we didn't solve the problem. Our defense still can't really defend that well. We didn't solve that problem either. And we made our goaltending worse and more injury prone. So what are we doing in Toronto? Like,
how do I shoot myself in the foot?
Google.
You know, and the flip side of this, the Hurricanes, I think, finally upgrade the goaltending, which we've been saying that they need to do for years. And they have a really, really solid pair this year. Freddie Anderson and Antti Raanta. How do we feel about those two?
I thought it was hysterical when this news was breaking and we were clowning on them at first. Like, what are they doing? And then it all made sense. With the whole Nedeljkovic situation. Because, to be honest, losing Nedeljkovic for these two, I don't think was really worth it at the end of the day. But,
no.
Yeah, no. Like, not in any world. But for a team that wants to just keep, that is hoping to maybe run for another cup, or make another cup run, rather, not, you know, because obviously they haven't won. But in recent years. So, I don't hate it. I think that they got two more veteran-esque, been through tough games type of guys who were gonna grind it out through the season, and they got a nice 1-2 pairing, which they always like down there for some reason. They really enjoy rotating goalies.
Yeah, I mean, losing Nedeljkovic I still think is stupid, especially when you consider the fact that they're paying Antti Raanta $2 million. And Nedeljkovic got, what, 3.25? Like, you really couldn't have squeezed out an extra $1.25 million for a Calder caliber goaltender. Not to mention the fact that you also then went out and signed Tony DeAngelo and Brendan Smith. So you could have taken the 1.8 that you spent on those two absolute plugs and given it to Nedeljkovic. Which, like, can we just talk about what the fuck are the Carolina Hurricanes thinking with signing Tony DeAngelo? Can anybody make any sense of that at all? Does this make any sense to anyone?
You're just being a liberal flower.
Yeah, like, politics aside, even if you ignore everything that this guy has said politically, he's still used racial slurs in juniors. He still tried to beat up his teammates last year several times, and he still allegedly used racial slurs towards Keandre Miller. So, great.
And he stole the puck.
Like, okay, let's ignore the fact that he supported a awful human being in office who we shall not name, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. Let's ignore that. Let's ignore his politics. He's still a homophobe. He's still racist, and he still tried to beat up his teammates several times last year. So, I mean, maybe the Hurricanes were thinking, well, we're in Carolina, so like people will care less about being a racist, but it's also like, dude, you're in the NHL, and the Carolina Hurricanes over the last few years have kind of started to make their brand of hockey club as, friendly, opening, loving. Their fans, they talk about their fans being, so kind and caring. And the organization kind of just has that ethos that they're putting out there. You know what I'm saying? And then you turn around and do this. I don't care. I don't care if Tony DeAngelo can still play in the NHL. He's not worth it.
Also, people have to realize is the Rangers are a stand-up organization. It's not like they gave this guy one chance and then booted him. It's not like they didn't understand that he was a kid and give him opportunities that he probably shouldn't have even had to begin with. Like, it's not like everyone's saying, oh, he deserves another chance. Oh, he deserves another chance because he's a good player or whatever. It's like, first off, he's a bum on the blue line. Let's get this straight. The guy's looking like a bum out there his last season, and he's getting it and blaming it on his last few games as a Ranger and blaming it on the fact that his head was messed up or whatever, that the tension in the locker room, blah, 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 bullshit. My ass. If you can't go out there and play with the bullshit that you're stirring up, then you're just a problem. And you suck. Like,
not to mention most of the tension that he was talking about was his fault.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
you caused it.
And ignoring the fact that the New York is a liberal state and whatnot, and the face of the Rangers is huge and whatnot, the Rangers don't talk about what happens in the organization that much. You don't really hear much news on what happens in locker rooms ever in New York. It's not something that's talked about that much in hockey in general. So for these players to come out and openly speak against him like that and say these things and the organization to say it is huge. Most teams just give a polite statement, we've parted ways or whatever. It's like, no, the Rangers and the team explained what happened. There were news stories about what happened. There was no speculation at the end of the day. We got the details because at a certain point, he's not your teammate. He doesn't deserve respect. He doesn't deserve the cordialness that every other team that the organization gives to their players and that teams give to their players. He lost his rights as a player, in my opinion.
I also don't want to hear any nonsense about, oh, he's just a kid, he's just young. Full disclosure,
he's made mistakes before.
I'm 23 years old, and I'm not making these kind of... I'm not a professional hockey player. I get that, okay? Don't come at me in the comments.
We grew up in the same place, though.
But,
he grew up 20 minutes down the road.
Tony DeAngelo is 2 years older than me at this point, and he's still a racist. He's still... you can make a lot of arguments for people being brought up a certain way, but by the time you hit a certain age, specifically when you're playing a sport like hockey where it's team first...
And you're educated. He's an educated individual, too.
That's what I'm saying. You can't just say, oh, he's just ignorant. He's from a certain area. He's from XYZ. That's how he was brought up. There's no excuse. There's literally zero excuse you can give to me that I'm going to buy for him being a racist. Several times. It's not just when he was in juniors, it only happened once. Several times him being racist. I don't buy it. You can't tell me he's a kid. I'm 2 years younger than him, and I know enough to say that, hey, racism, not cool. Shouldn't judge people for their skin color. Shouldn't use certain language. This guy's 2 years older than me, and he's still defending this crap? No. It's not. I don't buy it, okay? You can't sell me, don't feed me shit and tell me it's chocolate, because I'm not buying it. So, I mean, I didn't, all of this is just to say, I don't think DeAngelo is good enough, to really solve the issue that the Hurricanes have, which is replacing Dougie Hamilton, right? I don't think that he's worth the locker room trouble, and I don't think he's good enough to really fix the issue. I mean, they got Ethan Bear, who's one of the best young defensemen in the NHL. Don't know why Edmonton is letting him go, but they got Ethan Bear. They signed Brendan Smith. Brendan Smith brings a little bit of physicality. I don't think he's all that great, but he brings some physicality. You signed Ian Cole, who brings a little bit more of that veteran presence. You did not need Tony DeAngelo. I mean, right now on their roster, they have Slavin, Shea, Gardner, Pesci, Cole, Bear, and Smith. They have 7 defensemen. You did not need to sign Tony DeAngelo. You now have 8 NHL caliber defensemen. What was the point? Are you hoping to turn him into a reclamation project and trade him halfway through the season? Because if you are, then you're an idiot. Because I don't think most NHL teams want anything to do with this guy.
No.
So what was the point? I don't get it. I don't understand. Why? Why is this move being made?
Let's not harp on this too much. There's something a team that I actually want to talk about, which didn't make the craziest acquisitions, but they made enough that I think they're really a cup contender this year, and it's the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah.
Signing Riley Nash for a 1-year deal, signing Luke Johnson for a 1-year deal, that really beefs up that center core. I'm excited for the Winnipeg Jets this year.
I mean, the Jets also, specifically on the on the back end, made some concentrated efforts to get better, right? Look at their back end now going into this year. They acquired Nate Schmidt, which
huge
big defenseman there. They have Josh Morrissey, Nate Schmidt, Brendan Dillon, Dylan DeMello, Nathan Beaulieu, Logan Stanley, Ville Heinola, Sami Nuku, and Neil Pionk. I mean, I assume that not all of these guys are going to be on the roster come the start of the season because you have 9 defensemen who are all, I'll say 8. I'll say 7 NHL. I'll say 7 NHL defensemen, and Heinola and Sami Nuku are still kind of trying to more work their way into the lineup consistently. They were in and out the last couple of years, but 7 bona fide NHL defensemen plus 2 young guys who were trying to establish themselves. And the last couple of years, the issue in Winnipeg, besides not having a second-line center, has been the defense. The defense has always been young, but kind of leaky, So if you look at this defensive core, you have Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon, who are 2 solid top 4 defensive-type defensemen to really relieve some of the pressure on Connor Hellebuyck. And then you have some young guys like Logan Stanley's not bad in his own end. He's a big boy. Neil Pionk has been surprisingly really rounding out his defensive form as of late.
I think Neil Pionk was one of the best defensemen in the league last year.
I think that this team has genuinely put themselves back into that Stanley Cup contention conversation. I mean, there's some questions about that second line a little bit. If the first line is Scheifele, Connor, and Wheeler, as it was the start of last year. You now have Stasny, Dubois, Ehlers. Some questions about PLD. Can he start to really pick it up because his stats were kind of last year? But I think they have really good depth. I like Andrew Kopp a lot. I like Riley Nash. I like Adam Lowry a lot. I think that this team has, as you said, boosted themselves right back into that Stanley Cup contender conversation. Last year kind of notwithstanding, where do you see, in that Central Division where some teams kind of getting worse? The St. Louis Blues, questionable. Dallas Stars, questionable. Do you think that this is the time? Do you think this is the Winnipeg Jets' opportunity now to kind of put themselves back in that conversation?
Oh, I wholeheartedly believe so because, like I said, I had them going deep last year. Actually, no, that's not true. I had Montreal beating them, but that's because I was a Montreal stan last year for the playoffs. No, I think that they're getting Nate Schmidt was huge, because that adds solid, just great defenseman. Nate Schmidt is a solid defenseman, and that's what they needed to. Because Pionk was the star defenseman last year. He was kind of running the decor, and he was playing stupid minutes. And I think that because Nate Schmidt I would imagine he might play with him, but even if he doesn't, I think he's a solid reliever for him. I think he's the best probably reliever that you could get if he's not on the same line as him. And having Dylan DeMello and Logan Stanley, like you said, the big boys out there is huge. And the depth is really what we talked about last year. The depth on that defense is what they needed to adjust. And they didn't go out and sign like Dougie Hamilton. They didn't go out and sign like huge names. They went and got Nate Schmidt, a solid top 4 defenseman who's not one of the biggest names in the league. He plays on a really heavily offensive-minded and just kind of trappy Vegas Knights before this. So I like the signing. I like this. I really like this team going into next year. And Connor Hellebuyck, I thought was criminally underrated this year. His stats, I thought, were skewed because he was in the highest scoring division. I expect him to be shut down in Vezina next year, honestly.
Yeah.
And I see PLD working into the system. He had a rough year, honestly, with everything going on between Columbus and then going to the team. That's a lot of mental strain. And especially with everything that was going on with COVID, it's an even more mental strain because you can't. It's not like he can go and relieve his life by going out to dinner with his family and shit as he pleases, or going out with the team after the game. You don't get to build those bonds and like that relationship with your team when it's COVID situation. So it makes a big difference now that he's going to be on the team full time in a non-COVID sanctioned world.
Yeah, and I think last year the Jets kind of had a little bit of a down year, just adjusting to a lot of things and dealing with the Patrick Laine situation. The defense still was kind of questionable at parts last year. So I do like this whole situation that they've got going for them now going into next year. And I do want to stay north of the border. I think, not. We'll discuss about this team because I think they're important to talk about. And then at the end, we can kind of hit any little signings that we might have missed. 'Cause I think we've hit a lot of the big ones to this point. But, Zach Hyman, he gets paid.
I knew you were going to say this one.
$5.5 million to the Edmonton Oilers. Coming off some really good years with the Edmonton Oilers or with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Edmonton Oilers also acquired Duncan Keith. They re-signed Tyson Barrie. They got Cody Ceci via free agency. I like a lot of the stuff that the Edmonton Oilers did this offseason because they also got some other key pieces like Warren Fogle and Derek Ryan. And, part of the issue with the Oilers these last couple seasons has been the depth. The depth hasn't been there. It's not doing anything really significant. It's not scoring, and it's also not really being physical enough to deter the other teams from kind of just running all over the Edmonton Oilers. But I think Warren Fogle is a fantastic middle six player. He can play on your second line if you need him to. He fits perfectly on your third line, in my opinion. Derek Ryan, more of a bottom six kind of guy, fits on your third or fourth line, very physical kind of player. Zach Hyman, a speedy, just absolute nasty little winger who will win you every puck battle he possibly can in those corners. Again, depth on the wings is something that we've been discussing with the Edmonton Oilers for a long time as well. They don't have any depth on the wings. I think that they've done a lot of good things this offseason up front.
Now talk about the one bad thing.
Well, there's multiple bad things in my opinion.
We'll talk about the one big bad one.
Look, I don't understand their fascination with Mike Smith. I don't get it. Like, okay, the guy was getting Vezina votes last year, or he got one Vezina vote, and his stats actually weren't that bad. That's great. What did he do for you in the playoffs? Like, absolutely nothing. And you can't, cheap out on the goalies over and over and over and over again and literally keep bringing back the same goaltending core of Koskinen and Smith and wondering why it's not working. I mean, thank God for the Edmonton Oilers that Koskinen's contract is up at the end of this season. Thank God that his modified no-trade clause is going to be gone, and that $4.5 million cap hit is going to be gone. You know, these idiots signed Mike Smith for 2 years, so congrats, he's yours until he's 40. Deal with that nonsense. But at least next year they can maybe sign a goaltender. And I'm honestly not all that thrilled with what they've done on the back end this season, or this offseason. I really don't think they've done all that great. I mean, you trade away Ethan Bear to the Carolina Hurricanes. You bring in Duncan Keith. You re-sign Tyson Barrie. You re-sign Cody Ceci. I'm not thrilled. I'm really not thrilled. I mean, Duncan Keith is 38. He's not the defensive player he once was. You know, in his heyday, Duncan Keith, obviously one of the best offensive defensemen, but man, did he eat up minutes in that defensive zone. You really can't do that anymore. Tyson Barrie, okay, cool. He put up 40 to 50 points. What did he do for you in the defensive zone? Cody Ceci. I think Cody Ceci's underrated. But do I think he's good enough defensively to make up for the rest of the lack of defense you're getting from the rest of your defensemen? Not really. I mean, really the only guys on this roster I would say are good in their own zone is Nurse, Clefbaum, and Chris Russell, but none of them are cornerstones. You know, Nurse I think is as close as it comes. I think he's like just almost there to being a cornerstone defensive defenseman, but even if you consider him a cornerstone, he needs more support from the rest of the defensive core, especially considering the goaltending, especially then considering the lack of defense they get from the forwards. You need more than Clefbaum and Chris Russell, and you especially need more than what you're getting out of Duncan Keith, Tyson Barrie, and Cody Ceci, and Evan Bouchard. But Evan Bouchard's still young. He's still rounding out his game. We don't know what he's going to turn into, but like, why are we signing more offensive defensemen when we don't have a goalie? You know, if you at least sign like an elite goalie, you can say, well, you know, he'll make up for some of the mistakes, but you signed Mike Smith again. Like, what do you make of the moves that the Edmonton Oilers have been making this offseason?
They're really just hell-bent on being the Chicago Blackhawks, I guess, of 2013 with, like, a worse goalie. We've seen, like, I don't know if they're watching old Mike Smith footage from like Arizona or something, and like they're really getting their hopes up. But like, come on. It doesn't matter how good your offense is in the playoffs. We've been over this. Defense wins cups. Like, would China have won without a Great Wall? No, they wouldn't have.
Interesting analogy.
I just like I can't wrap my head around it. Like, they could have went for why didn't you try and go for Anthony Ronte? He wanted 2.5.
Or you could have traded for Darcy Kemper, who went to the Colorado Avalanche. Who? Yeah. I don't want to gloss over Darcy Kemper, but to me, it's kind of a lateral move. I think him and Grubauer are more or less on the same level. So,
well, why didn't they go for Grubauer? Like, my brain hurts.
Just, you know, Mike Smith, bro. I mean, he only wants 2.2 for 2 years.
Like, it was have Connor give up $300,000 and have him win a cup. How about that? I think he'll give it up. We just realized we heard today that Nathan McKinnon is spending like $56,000 a year on just meals. So, or 52.
Yeah, I mean,
like, my brain.
It's just disappointing to me because, like I said, I actually really, really like what they've done up front. They've added depth. They got some grinders. They got some meat and potatoes hockey players to really kind of round out that middle and bottom six. They got a little bit of grit. And then they go to their defense, and it's all offense all the time. And you're like, but okay, did they at least get a goalie that can maybe make up for some of those defensive mistakes? No, not at all. I'm not even saying not really, not at all, period, full stop, end of discussion.
I could score on Mike Smith.
And I don't want this to come off as like, oh, you just hate Mike Smith, but he's just not the right goalie for this team. Honestly. Like,
if you watched the playoffs last year, you would have seen that.
If Mike Smith was signed as the backup to, if Mike Smith was signed as a backup to, say for, the Rangers trade away Georgiev and they sign Mike Smith, I don't have a problem with that. I think Mike Smith is, at his age, a serviceable backup. But you cannot rely on him. You cannot rely on him to carry the torch on a team, especially after what the Rangers did this offseason, making their defense better. But you can't rely on him on a team like the Oilers. You just can't. It's just not the right fit. If he was backing up Semyon Varlamov or Ilya Sorokin on the Islanders, he's good enough to do that. If he's backing up Vitek Vanacek on the Capitals, I really don't even hate that either. He's just not good enough for this Oilers team because this Oilers team needs a goalie who's going to make up for the defensive mistakes. And newsflash, Edmonton, yeah, your division sucks this year, okay? The Pacific Division, awful. Terrible division. But, newsflash, you now have to play the other teams. You don't get to just play in your division this year. Guess what? You have to go play the Central Division teams. You have to come across to the East. And granted, you're only playing each team twice. But if 7 out of the 8 teams in the Metro are good teams, that's 14 games against solid hockey clubs that you don't have, that you were beating up on the Senators and Canucks with last year. I don't think this Oilers team is going to have any problem breezing into the playoffs, but good luck getting anywhere in the playoffs with this current configuration because you're not going anywhere. It's not happening. You might win a round because you play a Pacific Division team in the first round, but we saw what happens, to teams that cross over and aren't ready for that crossover. God forbid you have to play somebody in a Central Division that's ready to kick your teeth in. Good luck. That's all I can say. I just don't get it. It seemed like Ken Holland was almost there. He started to read the chapter about recent winning Stanley Cup teams. He was like, oh, the Tampa Bay Lightning traded for Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow, and they beefed up the bottom 6. Okay, we can do that. And then he just shut the book. And it's like, no, but you missed the chapter where they paid Vasilevsky $9.5 million, and they have Victor Hedman and Mikhail Sergachev and Ryan McDonough and Jan Ruda. You're missing. No, go back, read the book. Ken Holland, what are you doing? And again, this is coming from Ken Holland. When his Detroit Red Wings were winning Stanley Cups, they had Nick Lidstrom. So why doesn't he understand that you need defense? I don't get it. I don't understand. Why was he asleep for his entire run in Detroit? Did he have that memory wiped out of his brain Men in Black style? Was he like, hey, all my success in Detroit, I'm going to need that part of my brain removed? It's like, no, put it back.
Or I'm going to need that edited. Can we rewrite that script?
Please, no. Anyway, I think that's most of the significant signings. I think the Phillip Deneau signing in LA is worth talking about with an asterisk next to it. I still want to see what LA does, because if they go balls deep and get Jack Eichel, I think it's worth talking about. Otherwise, still not super thrilled with the LA Kings roster. And there's other moving pieces, obviously, but
I think Montreal made some solid additions, actually. I think that they.
I don't know where I sit on Montreal.
You just don't like Montreal.
Because they have to play the rest of the Atlantic Division now. You don't get to just beat up on the Canucks every day. Montreal, I don't think Montreal can hang with the Panthers or the Lightning or, honestly, even this amalgamation of what's left of the Boston Bruins. I don't think they can hang with those guys. And, we did the math. In a regular season last year, they wouldn't have been in the playoffs.
They signed Mike Hoffman. They signed David Savard. They signed Paquette. Those are solid signings.
But does any of those replace Shea Weber? That's the big thing in my opinion. Like, let's, we can't overlook the fact that he's done for all of next year at minimum, maybe his career. We can't overlook just how much he meant for that team, And no disrespect to David Savard, but
hey, this
not
is
Shea Weber.
You think Subban would go back?
I mean, I think he'd waive his no-trade clause. I don't think Montreal would make that trade, though. Only just because it seems to me like Montreal is kind of just hell-bent on running this core out the door and then seeing what happens after with the young guys. I don't think it would be smart for them anyway, honestly. With an asterisk, it depends on the kind of contract that they could get him on. Because if they can get him on like a 4-year, $6.5-7 million deal, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But if he's looking for his retirement contract, like if he wants like a 6-year deal, I don't know if it's worth tying up that much money for that long. I don't know. I mean, I think Montreal kind of had a miracle run last year in a year where, under normal circumstances, they would not have even been in the playoffs. So I don't know. I mean, I think the moves that they're making are smart, but losing Philip Deneau is big, right? That hurts. He was basically their first-line center for all of last year. So your first-line center walks out on you. You have Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, who I think are going to play a huge role this year. They had their coming out party in the playoffs. Fantastic young players. They give a much, much needed boost to that offense. But can they overcome the loss of Shea Weber and Philip Deneau and have to play in the Atlantic Division and you have to play all the teams in the Metro 3 or 4 times? I don't know. It's a tough sell. It's definitely a tough sell in my opinion. I'm not super thrilled with, and it's nothing that they did. It's just, well, besides not signing Philip Deneau, but it's not their fault that Shea Weber's career is over. It's just like, oh boy, we now have to play the defending Stanley Cup champions 4 times a year, plus the Florida Panthers, who are now a super solid team. Honestly, Stanley Cup contenders. We have to play them 4 times a year. How many times do we get to play the Canucks this year? Oh, only twice. Oh, we need those 6 other wins. That's not helpful. I mean, like if you look at the Atlantic, the top 3 spots are probably going to be taken by Tampa, Florida, Toronto, or Boston. So you're realistically fighting for a playoff spot against the Metro Division, and are they better than the Flyers, Capitals, Rangers, Penguins, Islanders? I don't think so. I mean, this is a little too early to be doing season predictions, but I don't know. I know I was on the bandwagon too, but
no, you were not. You were always against my boys.
I think the train is off the tracks.
I'm still running with the train,
and I respect that because, like I said, I've said multiple times, if there's any one person who I think at this point deserves a shot at a cup, it's Carey Price. I just don't think it's going to happen.
And now that Shea Weber isn't there, I hope they do it.
So, like I said, as more teams start to make moves, obviously still waiting on the Jack Eichel situation. Obviously, some teams kind of still in flux, the Lightning, the Panthers, the Islanders, still trying to work out their cap space situation. So as things start to develop, if we get more big trades or big signings, we'll be doing more episodes. Otherwise, the next episode will be, I don't know, maybe one of those like kind of weird oddball goof off episodes we do about some random topic in the sport of hockey. Who knows? Keep your eyes glued to the Twitter page at LightningLam1, or you can follow me at my personal at LBGRob, and keep your eyes and ears glued to either the YouTube page, or if you listen on one of our streaming platforms, all of those links are in the description. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys again next time.